Ah, my friend. Hello. In the year 2015, I was about, 26, 27 years old. And we were getting ready at the company where I was working, Nerdcore Entertainment. Today, it's called Night Market Games. We were getting ready to release something called Endangered Species, Spinball Carnival, a game that I had had the pleasure of bringing from like a game jam stage. I made a little prototype that people really liked through getting like some funding, and we developed it using Unity, and we released it on mobile, and it was one of the most stunning commercial failures of my career. I want to say maybe one person ever made an in-app purchase in this game that we released. The way you would buy levels in the game, you could you got one level free. You could buy two other levels. I think maybe I'm the only person who ever bought other levels in the game. But I really love this game, and it was an important, like a formative experience for me as a professional game maker. I'm a game programmer by trade. I served as the sort of lead programmer of this project. I was working with principally like Audrey's story, and we were figuring out how to build games in Unity, and we developed practices that we would keep using for like the rest of our careers, I would say. What I want to do in this video is sort of show and tell of this game, and also a bit of a post-mortem, like a professional post-mortem of this game. There's a lot of choices we made, and the outcomes were good and bad. I think it'll be interesting to talk about that. So this game is, I don't know, about 2 hours long, maybe less. So this is a complete playthrough of it that I recorded. I kind of grabbed it from the jaws of obsolescence. I don't think you can get this game on the App Store anymore. It's getting pretty long in the tooth these days. So right before I still happened to have it on my iPad, and I was able to record this footage of it. Um, so that's what we're going to have a look at here. I'll be talking over my playthrough of it more or less. So, okay, the game intro. It starts like this. They're in the setting that's supposed to be well known from the TV show. You have to tap, tap, tap the screen. And it makes the wall fall down, the wall behind them. And, okay, all right. Listen, let me share a story with you. Ah, fuck. Endangered Species was a television series aimed at like adolescents, developed at an animation company called Nerdcore. An interesting animation company that doesn't exist anymore. They're an important part of like the tradition of animation in the Vancouver area, which is where I grew up and where I live. Um, this series is about a squirrel and a seagull and a rabbit, and they live inside a tree stump near like a garbage dump in a forest, something like that, in kind of like a suburban area. I don't know. Um, so our idea for this game was something like they find a pinball table at the garbage dump, and I think his name is Merle, the seagull, brings it home. Um, but the pinball table is cursed. It has a sign on it: danger, actually cursed. They disregard this danger. They play with the pinball table anyway, and they wind up getting transformed into pinballs, and then they have to escape from a cursed pinball world by kind of traveling through different parts of a magical pinball kingdom, um, and bringing light to the darkness, like finding old broken areas and repairing them so they light up and are pinball like again. That was the concept, right? Um, but the concept didn't always, well, problems began when we tried to make this concept fit with the brand Bible for endangered species that had been developed to support the animated series. Um, for example, we ended up with this constraint that the whole thing had to take place like inside the tree stump. Um, so the idea of sort of going into a pinball table was not really something they wanted to do. um, it didn't seem viable. So we weren't really permitted to create any character designs that weren't already present in like the season 1 of the show. I don't think there'd ever be a season 2. Um, and so we couldn't really create our own cursed pinball kingdom or whatever. We had to find something in the context of the show that would work for us. And there were these robot characters. Um, so somehow, instead of having this cursed pinball premise, um, you wound up being like drafted into service by these robot characters, and they're conducting some kind of vague robot carnival. And you're like laborers. You have to like support the robot carnival by like maybe cleaning up garbage or like fixing broken things. It's all really vague. It's all really kind of strange. It's dreamlike because in the end, the I would say the constraints of the brand Bible kind of shattered any hope. So right off the bat, I would like us to observe that there are too many things in this premise. There's too many things. That it's like pinball, but not really pinball. It's kind of like Sonic Spinball for the Sega Genesis, but not really. There's a carnival, but not just a carnival, a robot carnival. And not any kind of regular robot carnival, if there could be such a thing, but actually something taking place inside of the tree stump where the characters live, because the brand Bible dictated that it had to take place inside the tree stump where the characters live. So it's a carnival inside a tree stump. Um, this is the tutorial. The way this game works is there are these green zones, and if you hold your finger on the phone screen while the character is in a lit up green zone, time dilates, slows down, and the physics clock slows down. It gets like finer and finer, the intervals of time that it computes, um, along this nice animation curve that the designer, Audrey, could specify. We wrote all this stuff in Unity, right? Um, And so after you fling from one of these green zones, it darkens, and then you can't use it again for a couple seconds. But if you stack a bunch of green zones together, then you can like fling, fling, fling. Hold your finger, time slows down, aim, fling. Hold your finger, time slows down, aim, fling. Going from green zone to green zone. That's like the kind of navigational premise of this video game. We were trying to make a mobile-friendly Metroidvania, I guess. We've sort of wasted a lot of years trying to make a mobile friendly Metroidvania. Who hasn't, right? Am I right? I don't know. Um, and the vague premise of this game is that there are these robot guys and they want collectibles. They want these lightning charges. So get a bunch of lightning charges. We were inspired by games like Tony Hawk. Go through the level, move stylishly, get a bunch of lightning charges as you are moving stylishly. And then once you have enough, go and jump into one of these robot guys. And the idea is that every time you did that, the robot guy would sort of act to make the level more interesting for you. He would expand it in some way, right? In this case, the tutorial is trying to show you that you can interact, you can boop that robot character in the center. Everything's a robot. And when you do that, something interesting might happen. I think in this case it unlocked a gate. The gate unlocked some energy. There was some energy behind it. That allowed us to pay the robot host again. That's the loop of this game. Of course we wanted to do so much more. I think we wanted to have a lot more collectible things, but constraints left us with this. The idea is that you're trying to make the robots happy. this robot is not very happy because you haven't completed very much of this crazy carnival level yet. As you complete more of the little vignettes, as you do more things in the world, the little happy face gets more and more happy. And eventually it's fully happy, signaling that you've done all of the things. We only got to make a little bit of content for this game, just 2 or 3 levels. This level here is the free level. Now, we absolutely should have made the next level that you'll see, the sort of toilet level. That should have been the free level. We know this, like, you know how Doom, okay, Doom 1994, right? The shareware version of Doom legendarily includes episode 1 of Doom 1, which is a really, really, really good episode. You put the good one first, and then you get some percentage of users to buy, you know, the Shores of Hell, and Inferno and all those other ones. We put like our weakest level as free, right? Reasoning that maybe we'd want to actually sell the valuable content, and I think that was probably a mistake. But the whole monetization scheme for this game was a mistake. You know, the idea that you could do a that you could just directly sell like little chunks of explorable Metroidvania type area. It did not work out for us. A very interesting bit of content we were able to make for this game. We'll see right here. We created this thing called the Costume Galaxy. Your character can put on different little outfits. They can wear, it was a paper doll system that we made. So Pickle the rabbit here is going to turn into like a little shark. And we're going to go visit the Costume Galaxy now. So this place has a really cool 0G and unlimited fling navigation system. So you can just like fly your ass all through here. It's kind of in outer space, even though it's still in the tree stump because of the brand Bible. I don't know. But when you fly into one of these clothing nodes, the node like comes out and gives you more options. We can't buy things in this game anymore because it's not on the App Store anymore, right? It's been pulled. But we can still unlock some costumes just from the game levels that I happened to have purchased years ago. And Apple still lets you restore purchases from the past. I loved this 3D navigation, the outer space like Costume Galaxy navigation thing. If I had my way, we could have built a whole section of gameplay out of that. I think it would have been grand. You know, I made this whole cool Rainbow Road thing where you would fly into it and it would accelerate you along a path and you could like chill out in there and it was like a fast transit system. We wrote so many cool things. We'll see a lot of them in this playthrough, but we wrote so many like cool little systems for this game as we were figuring out Unity. Audrey, pretty sure it was Audrey, designed this mini golf sort of little tutorial challenge. The idea is that there's these cannons, canos, inside joke. They launch you places. And remember, the green fling zones are where you're allowed to exert influence as a player. So in those zones, I'm directionally aiming myself where I want to go. So by completing the mini golf challenge, we increased the little completion meter, the robot happiness meter. And in these cases, we're also unlocking like some more like costume pieces. That was another bit of content that we happened, I don't know, we worked on it. And we were trying to give players like something cute, something entertaining, a reason to explore, I suppose. It didn't really work out monetization-wise in any way. That's kind of one of the big stories of this project, right? It's very hard to make money on the App Store. This Crazy Carnival level consists of many of these like little mini games. I think the mini golf one is pretty strong, but a lot of them I would say are kind of weak. This one I think is just okay. Like In some ways, these remind me of the little mini game challenges you might do in a Zelda game, like a Zelda N64 era game. Um, but of course, they don't quite rise to that level of playability. Nonetheless, I mean, there's so many interesting design features on display here. Audrey, we wrote these systems where she could specify how bouncy each of the little targets are. It's kind of like a pinball table, right? So when your character hits them, you have to do a little bit of physics work. You got to calculate an amount of how much are they going to rebound off of that thing, um, and in what direction. In this case, we're trying to get 10 points. When you get 10 points, you unlock another little costume. This is kind of, building us up to the progression loop of the game. We'll see a much more elaborate sort of exploration pattern happening in the toilet level, the Aztec dungeon. I'm not sure what to even call it. Um, this is definitely not one of my favorite mini games, just because you have to kind of sit here for a while waiting for the clock to run out. But I do really like the physics engine work going on here. We figured out how to spawn a bunch of instances of the seagull character Merle. In this case, he's wearing a nice basketball skin. So we get the robots to fire little basketball Merles. We use a physics trigger since when one of them's traveling through the basket. Um, we wrote up a primitive scripting system using connected, mono behaviors connected together. And I think that's what Audrey would use to sort of program one of these gameplay systems. I want to say we had a mono behavior called a point bank, and the trigger could be set up to put one into the point bank when something came into it. And then other scripts could reference that point bank and be like, well, if this timer runs out and the point bank has greater than equal to 10 in it or whatever, something like that, then unlock a little save file marker. And then if something else is listening to the save file marker. And when that unlocks, play the animation of this gate opening up. That was sort of the level of scripting that we were doing in this project. You wouldn't really build a Unity game that way anymore. There's a lot more interesting stuff that you can do these days. I tend to prefer patterns based on like async await and UniRX. And I wouldn't generally distribute my scripting work across a bunch of mono behaviors. I'd rather do something a little bit more um, sort of like versionable, something with text if possible. Or at least like maybe a nice node graph, kind of like you might get in Unreal. There's all sorts of shit you can do, right? But we were just getting used to how those patterns worked. In this part of my playthrough, I think I get frustrated because I end up activating the basketball minigame too many times, and I get stuck there. I do it again, and I start swearing because it's like I have to wait another 30 seconds for this whole thing. So, I guess I've already tipped my hand. I fucking hate the robot premise. I deeply resent that we were made to base the whole setting of this game on these robots. In terms of our postmortem here, I would suggest that was one of the significant like disappointments of how this project turned out overall. It was kind of weird with the robots. That said, shout out to my esteemed colleague Jesse Ilham, who certainly did a good job making these robot characters adorable, working within the I guess you'd call them constraints that we were given. They are undeniably cute, even if generally this whole thing doesn't make a lot of sense. The environment, the walls in this game. You can see the walls in this one have an interesting like red and white trim, And then there's a big like world space repeating texture, like this bluish kind of background wall. Um, at the time, like Unity has some built-in tools you could do this with today. At the time, there was nothing like that. So there was an asset called Curvy. You can still get Curvy. Curvy is an ongoing thing. But we got that asset, and we would build the walls with out of splines, and you could connect the splines together at terminal points. And Curvy had a little extendable API, right? So you could get callbacks when the splines changed and stuff. I figured out how to procedurally generate 3D meshes, in various flavors, sweep along a line, as well as fill. Um, Found some like algorithms to do that, and wrote some Unity code such that when Audrey would move a spline curve in edit mode, it would regenerate these meshes, and you could save the meshes with the scene. And then when it was time at runtime to play, it wouldn't have to generate them again. They would be like pre-generated and waiting. A kind of primitive version of the stuff you have today, the much nicer sort of like content pipelines, right? Where you have an authoring scene and you like bake it, you do all that cool shit. We had to do a kind of primitive version of that. It was a very interesting experience to get to sort of build all of that stuff. Another interesting limitation with this whole engine, like you couldn't load even this carnival level. It would be way too heavy to have all the pieces of it loaded at the same time. So you'll often see the character traveling inside a Super Metroid like pipe, and then the camera waits a bit. What it's doing is like we made a little scene streaming system. We broke the level into different like prefabs, I think. Maybe it was even different scenes. Um, and when you're in the pipe, it's like a transitional one scene, and it unloads the previous scene and it loads up the next scene. It makes sure that only the relevant ones are active at any given moment. It's gonna happen right now. That little like I mess up my cannon shot here and get stuck in the hallway a bit. Very interesting, quirky design this game has. But in the moment of going through that pipe, the previous content is being unloaded and this content is being loaded. That was an interesting thing to have to figure out in Unity back around like 2014. This is like a simple whack-a-mole game. I really appreciate the way our art team, Pierre and Jesse, um, as well as Audrey, our lead designer, were able to integrate the 3D art, like these 3D whack-a-mole heads, with a kind of principally sort of like 2D, maybe you'd call it a collage art style. I don't know exactly. Um, this game reminds me maybe of Psychonauts in terms of its like art direction. Um, okay, just like I would like to note, very briefly pause the video here. Quick note. Look at that penguin. What a cute penguin. Jesse Ilham, our artist, loved penguins. Um, this was, I think, sort of a tribute to her. I think I actually opt to wear I believe, I guess we could say squid or octopus. There's only like 7 tentacles, so I guess this is a squid. um, in a perfect world, the costumes would have like done something. You know what I mean? Like had gameplay effects. Um, but we never really made it to that level of. We probably needed a couple more years of this with this game in the oven to get it to that level. I think it would have been a really cool project if we'd had the time and resources. But we were sort of only able to bring it to a barely releasable state and then kind of put it out and then quickly move on to something else. That's kind of a disappointment for me, for sure. Um, Although there were some pretty horrendous problems with the, I don't know, design premises and the control scheme, maybe, of this game, we could have fixed all of that and we could have had something. We still could even fix all of that and have something really interesting here. Um, it's going to be hard for you, my friend, to sort of feel it just through this video logging style. but it feels really great to move in this game, at least to me. Um, when you're not able to do the thing you want, like when you're stuck in a certain ads. I guess, we were able to monetize this game a little bit after all, right? Now we're going to check out what's really the crowning achievement in terms of this project, the Temple of Thrones level. The Temple of Thrones level is where we put kind of the majority of our work. It's the most interesting level. It has the most interesting stuff in it. So, of course, all of these fling areas, they were made out of curvy, just the same as all of the walls were. These bumpers were sort of drawn by our lead artist, Pierre. And I love the way the bumpers animate. I just like, if you pay close attention to a lot of the ones up at the top, those round gold ones, they do this lovely like blue glow. This level really closely resembles like an actual pinball table. We're sort of seeing that for the first time. That crazy carnival level, I don't know, we really shouldn't have put that level first. I think I was reflecting on that earlier, right? We definitely shouldn't have put that level first. This level is kind of a much better and more interesting example, I would say. Um, in this level, we have a true kind of shout out to like what a pinball world might be like. Um, we liked to design these levels. I think the way that Audrey sort of wanted to do it was you first get into a room and you pretty much have to collect most of the lightning in the room and fill up Mr. Robot Man for the initial time. And then that unlocks more gameplay. The whole idea was that you would like get a high score with lightning, get a bunch of this blue lightning stuff, kind of like in Tony Hawk, a big old accumulation of it. And you'd put it into one of these robot characters, and it would unlock more interesting gameplay for you. And that's a dream that was to some extent only partially realized. Like, is adding these extra red bumpers that you have to hit in order to open a gate really like enriching the experience of being in this room? I think what we're missing here is it's just parts that we didn't have time to build. We need like systems and systems and systems of collectibles and of like numbers going up. I mean, pinball, for example, the thing we're ripping off, right? Or trying to, rather unsuccessfully, would have a score, like a score that runs into the hundreds of thousands. And this lightning collectible resource is not quite that. So at minimum, every time you hit a bumper, you should have a little number go up. You put that into this game, you immediately have a far more compelling reason to be sort of bumping around these rooms. Um, just like in one of the important points for the kind of brand of this show was that the critters are in danger. They undergo slapstick comedy situations. So beneath this pinball table shaped room is like a bunch of explosive hazards, and if you fall into them, you can kind of watch the character um, look worried. Pierre does these wonderful animations for each of the characters. Their faces are really expressive as they're like running into dynamite stick after dynamite stick, and your little blue lightning count is slowly being drained towards zero. Like every time you hit an explosive, it goes down a little more. We'll see a bit of that later in the run. But it was important for brand reasons to have that kind of thing happening. And so it was a really elegant idea that the team came up with to sort of, rather than like in pinball, you go down a gutter and the ball is just gone and I guess you relaunch. In this game, I guess it's kind of like those modern Tomb Raider games where if Lara Croft falls into like a pit, she kind of gets seriously maimed in a really over the top animation. That game is doing kind of like a realism version of like cartoon violence, I guess, from the 90s. And this game is doing a much more kidified version of that same cartoon violence from the 90s. This rabbit room is troublesome for a lot of different reasons. Um, you'll see me really struggling to navigate it later on. Another interesting consequence of the sort of notion that we could only use elements in our story if those elements also appeared in season 1 of the television show we talked before about the overloading of concepts, right? Like, why is it not just a cursed pinball table? Why is it like a robot carnival pinball table that you're a janitor for? Like, why so many things, right? There's a similar problem going on in this level. It's a really heavily inspired by the sort of like Aztec temple, slightly Orientalist kind of like stuff you would see in like 90s cartoon television shows. There's clearly that element going on, and like for example, this large designed stone head that's kind of made in the image of this character Pickle. Um, but it's also a bathroom. It's a temple and a bathroom. Temple of Thrones, the level is called. And one wonders, like, does it need to be both a bathroom and a temple? I think perhaps one reason it might be a bathroom, there's some idea maybe that because, again, for brand reasons, the whole thing is set inside of a tree stump. We're sort of arguing that this is the character's bathroom, but they've imaginatively transformed it into being like some kind of cool ancient sort of temple thing. Personally, I don't really find any of that stuff very convincing. In this room, we can also really start to observe the, oh, I don't know, the pinballness. Once you fall out of that upper left space that I'm trying to stay in here, it can be quite difficult to get back up. You can see me sort of falling back from the middle tier down to the bottom tier, and then kind of struggling a bit to get myself back into the upper tier. I think at this point I'm just pressing for score. Um, and all of those elements are really quite crunchy. A lot of rooms in this game are difficult in kind of a pinball way, and I find that to be a really interesting component of the design. In retrospect, what I would do is maybe every time you collect any blue lightning thing, or even any time you hit a bumper, make all the zones reset so that you don't fall down as much. Make the game easier. This room is really kind of neat. This room is sort of like an underwater room. The physics are, you would set a big trigger area, like the designer could do that thanks to like Audrey putting in the trigger and me doing some programming. And so I believe in this room it's like maybe a little bit floatier than in other rooms. And you can see that in the background there's kind of like this bubbly motif happening. There is a really questionable and strange but fascinating navigational gimmick in this room. In order to zoom from the bottom of it around the curve to land in the top of it, you have to like fling yourself through 2 or 3 consecutive fling zones, gaining momentum each time. If you were only to use one fling zone, you wouldn't even be able to make it around like high enough to make it to the upper level and kind of continue navigating the level. That was something that I noticed here in my like playthrough, 10 years after making this game, I guess is what we're doing here. And I really love though, like the feeling of hitting those breakout tiles. It's like, we tuned that stuff really well. I believe that Unity, we're using just the Unity kind of 2D physics API, the classic one that would have been available in like 2013, 2014 when we're working on this. I think that its 2D physics API is actually a wrapper around like Box 2D, if I'm not mistaken. Um, in any case, it certainly has that sort of feeling to it, and I really like the feeling of it. Our character, the pinball, of course, the rotation of the art that we see is reflective of the physics body's actual rotation. So the body it's not like a fixed rotation like it would be in most platformer games. Mario, in classic Mario, has a fixed rotation. But this pinball is free to sort of gain rotational momentum as it makes contact with surfaces that have friction. And then the rotational momentum that your character has can then contribute to, like, in various ways that can have an effect in how they roll along a surface when they hit it. All of this is not quite from pinball, Do you know what I mean? Because a pinball is constantly, it has friction against the table that it is on. So you if you wanted to do a physics diagram of it, you'd have to calculate like the incline of the table probably, and then some coefficient to do with how frictiony, like how lacquered is the wood that it's rolling on, something like that. And all of that would kind of create an ambient drag on the ball. I believe we do have some small amount of that sort of drag that will go on in this game, but predominantly this game actually has gravity like a classic platformer. It just sort of, you accelerate downward at a pace as if you were just falling. Um, the game is pinball inspired in some respects, but I would not say we leave players with the sense that they are playing on an inclined table. I mean, for one thing, the character never rolls like face over face the way they sort of would if you were on a pinball table. So there's like a really interesting story about which choices we made in terms of taking a general notion of pinball, but combining it with some kind of, like, this is at this in this level we really see the Metroidvania exploration-y style of it. I'm just kind of jumping myself through like literal. I'm practically Morph Ball Samus here, crawling through these tubes and getting myself a little collectible. I mean, maybe I wish it was a missile tank or like an E tank, maybe a power bomb, instead of just being a gentlemanly costume that I'm perhaps not so interested in. um, but that's like a function of these like compromises that we had to make in this teeny tiny little slice of time and resources that we sort of had to make the game with, right? I believe we kind of, at that time we were winding up with a little more art capacity towards the end of the project, and so we could put people to making this interesting and diverse paper doll system. It would have been more important to work on other things in terms of actually making this product like better. I sort of know that now, having a little more experience. But Skins gave us something to say that we had like multiple categories of in-app purchase so that we could say that the game had monetization features in it. We were just taking our first steps with the grim and dire problem of monetizing on like mobile app stores, right? um, and we were in a way, yeah, just a little naive about what sort of stuff you actually have to do, what sort of things an audience is looking for when they reach for that credit card and they tap that purchase button. You know what I mean? They certainly don't want like these relatively useless like cosmetic skin packs. They're a little more discerning than that, I would say. There are these very interesting, like in this level, we see all these wild constructions involving, I guess, a bit like Donkey Kong, these cannons that sort of shoot you um, to and fro. I really enjoyed that loop we just saw of kind of two cannons that will spin you around until you catch one of the fling zones and kind of decide to exit. This level has a number of different kind of grand pinball table shaped rooms in it. Here's another one. Um, this is like, a big sort of temple-y orientalist kind of depiction of, the seagull character. And we have a fun toilet motif coming into play here. That there's like these toilet paper fling zones, and we'll see once I make it up there that when you fling off the toilet paper zone, it unfurls a little more because it's like you're like jumping off the toilet paper roll, causing it to like unroll more and more each time you do. A lot of the design of this game, it reflects I don't know, maybe we could call the phenomenon content starvation. You need to gather quite a lot of this blue lightning stuff in order to power the ghosts, the robot people, and kind of facilitate your continued progression. Generally, we've designed it so there's not enough lightning in one individual room to let you complete that room. You have to go into other rooms. And this level kind of has a really mono-directional uh, design to it, where you generally cannot travel back to previous rooms. So this unfortunate effect gets created. Like in this room, for example, in order to complete it, you'd have to collect all the lightning in this room and then go forward to a next one, get all the lightning in that one, and then go all the way around to the start of this level, and then travel back here, and then put the lightning into the little robot man. In general, none of this is particularly great, but of course, one reason we did it was just to like extend the gameplay, to try to give people something they could do for at least, I don't know, a couple of hours. This whole style is in a way almost, it's very AAA inspired, I would say. It's inspired by stuff like maybe Rayman. Uh, the visual splendor in this environment. I mean, I love it. I love the way this looks. Um, I think we sort of overspent on like every corner of it. It would have been perhaps better to have like 50 levels, it's like 50 discrete content chunks, and just have players playing through them. At least then we could have sold ads to them, right? This notion of having a rich, interconnected kind of Metroid like, and I mean, here we are being Morphball Samus again. The whole thing is quite Metroid like. I mentioned it earlier in this video, but the studio has sort of has this interesting part of its story where we have spent a lot of time chasing after a Metroid like experience, but on mobile phones. Here's a hazard, very Indiana Jones. Um, if you fall down that gutter, you get it, chased by a boulder, and the boulder eventually gets you. Takes a little bit of your score, I think. So for this project, this was in the era before Cinemachine. The Blackbird interactive Unity asset had kind of come out and really standardized the way that people think about dynamic camera in these Unity games. Um, so I built this camera rig, which, is a little bit like Cinemachine, actually, a much more simplified version of that. Um, you would essentially be able to place a variety of camera targets. They could be, you would specify, I think, like a minimum coverage area, and then it would adapt to the aspect ratio of whatever sort of viewport it's using to ensure that it like covers all of that area, that sort of thing. You could make a bunch of those camera targets. They could be activated and deactivated. They could be parented to things. They could be like moved around by whatever means. Generally, I think for this project, we would do everything just with mono behaviors. We'd make a mono behavior that would manage the life cycle of one of these like camera targets, depending on like its activity and its destroyedness, all of that kind of thing. Um, and so that they would have a priority, like a numerical priority. So the highest one would be the one that the camera goes to, and the camera would be programmed to sort of interpolate towards its intended destination, so that when one turned on, it didn't necessarily just cut. You could order it to cut, but it generally you would want like a smoother camera move. We see a lot of camera moves happen in here, right? Um, Man, look at this water. This water is so glorious. If you note, when I go into the surface of the water, it like waves a little bit. So, like, Pierre and I conceived of this thing. Pierre referred to it as the buoy system. Um, the curvy spline stuff that we use to build the static walls, you can use it at runtime dynamically to build the dynamic mesh. It's pretty expensive, but we did it in a couple of places for fun. One of those places is this water stuff, right? So when I completed a certain like thing, this water filled up, And there's a special physics trigger in the water, of course, that creates a kind of upward buoyancy. So the water sort of tends to resist you, shoots you out of it. We have a couple of fluids in this game. That's really cool. And the surface of the fluids has a bunch of curvy splines, buoys. You could imagine like buoys that are on a little fluid simulation. And when the character goes into it, you add a little like wave that sort of slowly gets smaller and causes the buoys to kind of like meh, 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 like wave a little bit. um, it was a really unnecessary but extremely cool visual effect, and we were like extremely happy with all that, how all that shit worked out. I don't quite remember even whether we did get it into the game or whether we cut it from the game. I'll try to let's keep a sharp eye out as we see all of the various fluids that are present in this game. Um, Merle as a character is sort of very whiny. He's like the scared one. Pickle loves everything that's going on. The seagull is kind of like a goofy, a bit airheaded. I don't know. And then Merle is very like a squirrel, is very planning oriented. So the water flowing out of his eyes, the tears, are in character for him. This whole thing was conceived around, some idea of representing these three characters. It's like, I don't know. The thing that can happen when you make branded content is you're asked to plan for a glorious future that seems improbable at the time you're doing the project and becomes, I don't know, a little bit silly as time marches on. So, like, if these characters were as popular as Ren and Stimpy, then it would be really cool to have a big character of Merle the squirrel. It'd be cool to have a big character of, I don't know, yeah, um, like Rocco. It'd be cool to have a character. Maybe not Ren and Stimpy, or the guy who made that. I don't know, but like maybe Rocco from Rocco's Modern Life, something like that. Had a big statue of him in a game. I think that would be kind of like there's this interesting thing where like the connection you have um, is important. And so we, while making this game, were imagining sort of a world where Endangered Species, this TV show, was a huge success and the characters were household names. This room dedicated to, I'll just call him Gull, the seagull guy, Gull, is something that was intended for a world where the character Gull was inherently crowd pleasing. But here in 2024, I believe we would say these characters are obscure, perhaps forgotten, right? Um, so that creates a really interesting situation for us, like artistically, as we observe the way this game works. It's a bit weird to have this big statue of a seagull guy. I mean, okay, here we go. Wild take. B Sprawlbug here to give you a wild take. Um, this statue here is like a monument to Ozymandias, right? I am Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works and be judged. A kind of like we encounter it now, a monument to a forgotten thing, right? The great works of like Gull, Pickle, and Merle are sort of forgotten to us at this point, perhaps. But at one time we built this monument, right? And this monument sort of says through the grandeur of these statues that we made, it says like, I'm Pickle, rabbit of rabbits. Look on my image and be entertained. And we, of course, are not necessarily as entertained as the statue indicates that we should be. Um, and that's kind of a fascinating thing, to kind of look at from here. The world of branded content making is really an interesting one, kind of a strange one sometimes. You can meet a lot of different characters within it. Um, and they'll really like, determine your fates and your fortunes as you try to make stuff in that context. Sometimes you encounter like an executive kind of guy who really has a specific idea in mind and won't listen to anything other than their idea. Um, Like maybe there's a particular mobile game that they like, and they'll just be like, well, I want you to make that, but for our property. And you might explain, well, that's like that game costs millions of dollars. You're not giving us that money. We can't do that. And he'll be like, okay, I understand. I understand. So just make that though. And you try again to explain, like, I mean, we can try to include elements of that. We can try to give you the style or the feel of that, but at a certain point, we have to think about like scoping it to something we can afford. And he'll be like, "Yeah, no, I totally get that, right? Like scope control is really important. So like, just make that though." That's one type of character. Obviously, we're not doing that on this project. This project is so like weird. It doesn't really look like anything else, in my opinion. I think on this project we had an interesting other sort of thing, right? Where like when invited to give input, the people that we were working with on the kind of brand side really didn't know what they were looking at. And I suppose they were right not to know what they were looking at. It's a pretty weird project. The sort of constraints that wound up coming out of the whole process, stuff like, it's a robot carnival, it's being in the stump, it's reusing content, it's using what is already approved. When you make branded content, the burden of getting things approved is very high. It's very stressful. The process of asking for something to be approved is always a kind of game, right? A process of give and take. Um, so, if, for example, you were to make lots and lots and lots of original stuff that they haven't seen before, and then it's now going to be associated potentially with their brand, they're going to want to look at it, right? And they might not have a lot of time for what you're up to, so they might not really want to look at it that much. Um, if you're showing them all this stuff, that could just be overwhelming, and they might just say something like, "Well, just use the stuff that we already made." You know what I mean? It's already there. I think that's kind of a thing that would be happening in this case. Our team preemptively did that, I would suggest, um, because every time that we would have needed to come to them with something different, there was this certain risk that they would just, I guess, step on the whole thing, right? Or that something really interesting would happen, and it would cause a bit of chaos. There can be a little bit of danger in a relationship, where you are sort of viewed as fully secondary to like some other commercial endeavor. Sometimes you get a really chill relationship where people are really supportive of whatever you sort of want to do, as long as you're not really making them look bad in some extremely obvious way. Other times people want to just be really conservative, and they would rather you not succeed at all than they potentially regret approving something. Do you know what I mean? It can be hard to sort of ask to be treated as something that's really important. It's something that really matters. But that's, I think, really one of the key things you learn to do as you get more experience making branded work. You really have to start to insist upon getting whatever it is that you really think is critical to making the project like actually succeed. Sometimes it's just impossible because the personalities you're working with are impossible, but of course, a lot of the time, the projects that do succeed in this kind of like branded content area are the ones where somebody at some point, probably actually a lot of people along the chain, had a little bit of like courage, right? And did sort of ask, can it be a cursed pinball machine that they found at the dump, and none of this other stuff about robots, but it's more like there's an evil pinball wizard, or it's just something really simple, right? I think we easily could have gotten that in this case. This was one of our very first attempts at sort of doing any of this stuff. We had previously worked on Battle for Slugterra, a platformer game in the Flash world that used Box 2D. It was kind of physics based. So we had a lot of this built up ability to do that stuff. So that was kind of one of the ways that we started out making games in Unity. The more successful way was that we made a match 3 game that was actually very successful. But another thing that we tried a lot of times was kind of more of this like physicsy platformer thing, which is much more of a rarity in the mobile space. In addition to generating art with our curvy splines that make up the walls of this game. Of course, we can also generate physics bodies, physics splines. Essentially, you would have to take all these spline curves, you sample them in various ways to create, like, arrays of line segments. And those can be transformed into, poly colliders. That's the ideal case. You could use edge colliders, but then you might have problems with fast-moving objects and like interpenetration. I want to say a lot of the time it's poly colliders here on this project. Each of these walls that we see would be its own poly collider. We would feed it a list of we could feed it the polygons. I guess in Unity 2D it would be the pinball character, of course, is just a circle collider, classic sort of object. Huh. I'm struggling so hard. So at this part, I'm really trying to hit the 5 buttons on the side of Pickle's left ear, but I'm pausing the game and I'm stopping because I'm getting so sort of angry because I can't hit the bottom 3. I'm just missing. I'm missing over and over again. So we're going to continue that quest. Let's get the next video ready. I believe I come back and make another brief attempt, and then I get too angry again and I have to take another break. So serious issue, like the controls in this game were quite difficult and strange, and we really should have seen that at the time. And as I as a player in this footage get more frustrated, my ability to sort of do anything is just getting more and more diminished. The fact that there isn't a fling zone on the most likely gutter that I'm going to hit up there is quite a interesting design choice. And we can see that all of my attempts to ring around and hit the bottom side of that ear, they're just not working. It's really quite a bad design playing out right here. I think it's clear in a moment like this that we're seeing in this recording that what we need in this game at this point is some ability to double jump, some ability to move in the air, something additional to the fling zones. The original Game Jam prototype thing that I made, I believe you actually had a number of air flings that would sort of recharge as you were on the ground. And I think we just didn't quite get to that point in this production where we were starting to, we didn't have enough time to really ruminate on all of that control scheme stuff. I believe the development cycle was just a little bit compressed. It kind of always is when you're working in these tiny little branded game scenarios. I'm really impressed with this kind of thing that we do arrive at here. It's just missing so much, you know what I mean? A double jump would be heavenly. I think that would be a really simple, immediate thing to just take this and kind of make it more viable. You could do an unlockable skill tree, some kind of this game's so Metroid inspired, you might as well just do more Metroid shit, right? Maybe you unlock double jumps. Why not have the ability to sort of, deploy little bombs or make little explosions, emit force, kind of cause stuff to happen? I don't know. I mean, the reason in real life, as in Postmortem terms, the reason is because, of course, no time, no resources to really do any of that stuff. That was one. And then the other would be the sort of fear around what we could actually do with the brand or not do with the brand led us to not really want to try very much, I guess. There was a lot of, fear and confusion. I've sort of been talking about that a lot. That's one thing that I remember quite a lot from those days. Maybe those are just the memories that stand out because those are when I was the most uncomfortable back then working on this. The cuteness of that duck. I really love that little rubber duck. That's our artist Jesse Ilham, I believe, must have made that duck. It's so cute, and it feels to me like it's really in her style. That area up there is going to be like a disco party. But we have to get a bunch of blue charge in order to make that happen. I don't believe there's enough of it in this room. You're gonna have to go all the way around and collect more blue charge and then bring it all the way back here. All that shit is gonna have to happen before we can have a disco party up there. I've mentioned it before in this video, but that's like one of the really interesting content starvation, or like resource, yeah, content starvation is an interesting word for it, right? We just didn't have the time, we didn't have the ability to make enough stuff. um, and so instead of doing a whole bunch of other shit, in order to make enough content to have hours and hours of like doing this cool moving around, we instead had to take a very small amount of content and kind of require you to redo it and redo it and redo it, so that theoretically, um, we were hitting like a long enough playtime. But it was probably like a mistake, I would say. I think the notion of like sweeping through these environments to collect all of the things is pretty viable as a core mechanic for a mobile game. I think that you could build a whole mobile game meta, um, in whatever style you want to for one of these, um, and then have little challenges where you sort of fling a character through the environment, and I don't know. It could be like an Angry Birds project, for example. Boop all of the enemies, destroy all of the pigs. You could take this concept and expand it into like a full ass Celeste indie style kind of epic, involving a lot of sort of difficult, navigational challenges. I think that would wind up being a pretty cool thing as well. These areas where you're flying through a long tube, um, the tuning of that is really sensitive, right? You can't just launch the pinball at the start and trust it to go all the way around. It could so easily get stuck. And anytime you change any property of the physics simulation, that changes how the ball interacts with anything, you might find that a tube from earlier that you designed that was working fine now gets the player stuck. Um, so it became quite a big issue that we wanted to kind of have these interesting navigational sequences, but we needed a consistency as we continued to make like rapid iterations to kind of how all the physics was working. Um, I think these masks are pretty unfortunate. Maybe don't do the like indigenous mask thing. Um, what we did for the tubes was, put these trigger zones. So you have a Kirby spline. You use the Kirby spline to generate a collider that you make into a trigger. And you make it so that when the character, the pinball, is inside of the trigger, they tend to accelerate up to a desired target velocity in the direction of the spline curve, right? You can sample the player's position, where they are in the trigger. You can basically calculate the closest point along the spline curve that corresponds to the player's current position. You can use that to derive a normal direction, right? A direction of the spline curve. And you can determine what is the velocity of the player in that direction. And you can do two things. You can gradually nullify their velocity perpendicular to that normal direction, right? As well as accelerating them up to the target velocity in that direction. This is the basis of having a kind of like wind tunnel thing that would sweep the player in a desired course. So we put those into all of these areas where the player needs to like foop, 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 kind of go around and do all of this interesting stuff. It's what allows them to move really consistently through those areas. Now, mind you, my friend, this is going to be a complete run of Endangered Species Spinball Carnival. We're going to unlock everything. We're going to make the little happy faces for all of our levels go up to maximum. And that's why we're watching me sort of go around and around and around, trying to collect enough score to fill up all of the different, robot guys. I'm not even sure what we used to call them. At this point in my playthrough, I am realizing something really interesting and sort of terrible about the design of the checkpoint system here in Temple of Thrones. There are three checkpoints in Temple of Thrones, right? But unfortunately, it's like only one or like two of them are really useful. I believe one of the checkpoints just leads directly into the big loop. So I think it's like something like checkpoint 3 really does nothing except to put you into a loop that takes you back to where checkpoint 1 is, making it like essentially sort of pointless. Um, it might actually be the case that both checkpoints are that way, that they tend to occur after the relevant content that you would want to access with a checkpoint. Um, the the decision to do a Metroidvania like kind of organic exploration thing. I mean, it was fascinating to us. We were really hoping we could achieve something like, I don't know, great, something, Dark Souls esque, I guess. We were really into that stuff. But it was a pretty bad plan, I would say, for actually making this initial version of a project. That might have been great for a game 3, game 4 in the series. Game 1 in the series, I think we needed something a lot more regimented and like simplified. One thing that I noticed in the context of this playthrough is that bafflingly, I didn't figure out back then that no matter where you tap on the screen, you should be able to just drag from that point. Um, the direction you fling in should not be contingent on where your pinball is in the camera frame. But in this game, it is. So if your pinball is in the bottom right of the screen, the very bottom right, and you want to like fling up to the left, you have to like put your finger on the very bottom corner of your screen. It's like, I don't know. I do not know what we were thinking with that one. That's like obviously incorrect. You should be able to like put your finger down anywhere and then drag down and to the right, causing like a slingshot up and to the left. That's like super obvious to me now. This area where you sort of go through the pillars and the camera tilts. Pierre and I would have this funny disagreement over and over again. I loved the camera system that I'd made, and I always think it's really interesting to sort of expose the craft of the I love all the little illusions that go into making this 2D thing. Like the character just navigated past some pipes, and the pipes are actually positioned in 3D space closer to the camera, so they parallax, although they are just 2D drawn elements. They're like repeating textures. More pipes. Here they are, pipes. They're swept along curvy splines, right? There's a whole bunch of pipes in this room. They're part of forming the overall tableau. Um, I love the idea of tilting the camera to kind of skew that art to show the player like how it's made in almost in the space, to reveal a bit of the illusion. I love the part of the magic trick where you learn how the illusion is done. And Pierre at the time was sort of like, that's silly. Be like, he wanted it to look like Rayman. It's like, why would you show them like the view of your Unity editor or whatever? Why don't you just let it look the way it's supposed to? I think he was probably right. But in that one moment where you go around the big loop, and the camera just tilts a little bit to show you, um, that was like kind of like a little win that he gave me because he knew I had this goofy idea and I was interested in it. So we did it in that one spot, just a little bit. And I appreciate it for that. Oh, look at it. I think this is the one time in this playthrough I go through this dynamite zone. I love the sort of chaotic angles that the player takes. Of course, that's all just based on procedural physics calculation stuff. Um, just the incident angle between the two circle colliders hitting each other, right? That's going to determine the angle the character gets lost in. In retrospect, if I did this again, I wouldn't have done a fully 360 degree kind of fully accurate reflection angle in cases like that. I think what we should have done for the bumpers, for the hazards, for everything that bumps the character is simplify it, maybe to an octagon, something like that, um, so that it bumps you in a much more predictable direction. Here we are exploring the fling zone toilet paper. What a cool and wild concept. I really like that. If we had made the possible reflection angles more simplified, like in an octagon shape, I feel it would have made it a lot easier for Audrey to design kind of environments that propelled the player in predictable ways, so that you could start to form more realistic, like more interesting and reliable, like pathways, so that you can make combos that make more sense. When we do this thing where we have a kind of full 360-degree potential reaction angle to everything, um, we wind up in a situation where when you shoot yourself into a bumper, you just have no idea where you're going to end up afterward. That's sort of cool in that it's kind of like pinball, I guess, maybe. Um, but of course, pinball is designed to be this quarter eating thing, and we don't actually have a monetization mechanic around repeat playthroughs. So in this design context, I don't think it really made sense to have that kind of extraordinarily random reacting off of a bumper effect. I think maybe all of our bumpers should have instead had a much more strong, predictable directional effect. Honestly, it would have been great to give Audrey a tool where she could just pick like a spline, like a reaction, an arc. I want the player's ball to take exactly this arc when it hits this part of this bumper. Um, and then maybe release control of it, or like, do a bunch of computations so that will happen physically, and then release control of that as it gets to the end. And that way you could make a whole like cascading scene, like boom, 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 some kind of cool autoplay level, sort of like they do in Super Mario Maker, something like that. Here we are. Um, at this point in the playthrough, I give up on fully finishing Temple of Thrones, although I will finish it at the end. But here we are in the food level, was what we called it when we were developing this game. Heartburn Alley, I believe, is the official name we gave to this level. Heartburn Alley is kind of similar in scope to Temple of Thrones. It's not quite as beautiful, I would say. It didn't have as many like original art assets that Pierre and Jesse drew. Well, I don't know. I guess it's more that just for me having this level has a bunch of like hot dog wieners and like popcorn and stuff in it, and for me, I kind of prefer the toilet bathhouse sort of stuff, as sketchy as certain aspects of that are. But in addition to having there's this kind of difference in art direction, the design direction in this level is things that I like about the design direction in this level. This level gets rid of that practice that we were trying of having this kind of one directional, like go from this room to this room. You can't go back. You have to go forward. Then you do a big loop around. In this level, it's much more easy to just sort of go forward and back and then like navigate forward and back. More like a traditional Metroid, I guess. Um, and that allows the scoring points in multiple rooms stuff to be a little bit more merciful. So I really like that. Um, there's some really cool stuff with fluids in this level, like drink fountain water and kind of like interesting stuff like that, which we'll see coming up. One thing I really regret, there was some idea that by filling up the robot guy, you'd unlock further gameplay, right? But what's the further gameplay we were able to achieve here? It's really just that you have to shoot your pinball into this wall of popcorn, I guess 2 or 3 times, to make it crumble to get to the next area. If a player doesn't know to do that, I guess that this is the end of their run in this level, or um, I have concerns about sort of the lack of good tutorializing and messaging of each of these kind of bespoke individual moments. It's interesting that this game has kind of puzzles in it like that. But it's probably also like excluding anybody who did want to kind of go in and play this stuff. There's a lot of moments where you could just lose the player, I guess is what I'm saying, right? And in retrospect, I would really change like all of that. Clearly, it should be like it should be really, really, really clear what it is that you can do to make more things happen, right? I wish there was a way for the player to kind of zoom out and look at all of these gorgeous areas. Like, here's another area. This kind of like, I believe this is a drink machine, it's like a drink vending machine that we're trying to fix. It's a super cool kind of visual area. Um, it feels pretty good to shoot through the sort of curved grooves on the side that have like the lightning in them. I like the colors, the kind of pastel stuff. Here's a fluid moment. This is like a drink mixer. So we made these like bubble fling zones. You have to hit two buttons to open this like drain, and then you can get sucked into the drain, and then you come out the drink mixer, and the drinks are like working now. The idea, I guess, is that that's going to make the people attending this carnival happy, right? Because they can buy drinks. You're supposed to be like a servant making this carnival happen. Can't get over the strangeness of that story premise. I'm sorry, it bothers me. It bothers me, We should have done a simpler, cooler premise. I really wanted to do like a parody song tribute to Pinball Wizard, but it's about like a spinball wizard. That's the sort of stupid bullshit that I'm into. That was my ideal outcome for this project. That was like the vision I kind of had in my head. I don't know. Like imagine Pickle kind of bouncing off of like guitar strings as it sort of plays the opening chords to that Who song. But how the fuck would we be able to like work that out with like licensing and like you can't just do a song parody in a commercial venture and not expect people to talk to you about it. You're not just Weird Al Yankovic, really, right? So the whole thing is like impossible. So the dream of branded content is a dream of synergy, right? It's a dream that everything could come together and that in any given artifact, whether it's a game or a commercial or, this game, I don't know, a movie, um, you might suddenly see, oh, there's Chun-Li from Street Fighter or whatever, because why couldn't the brands like cooperate? Why couldn't we have Pete Sound Townsend from the Who sort of show up and like talk about being a spinball wizard? There's sort of no conceptual reason that all of that shouldn't be possible under like capitalism, right? But there's a million practical reasons why such things, unless you are a very, very, very powerful entity, can really never come to pass. I don't know. Pete Townsend, I think, will do all sorts of shit. We wouldn't have had it in the budget, even as affordable as it may have been. A project like Ready Player One, I guess, really exemplifies this idea of all of the like brand convergence. Um, okay, so concept, right? All this iconography that we internalize. I don't know, brand stuff. The Simpsons, everything. Steven Universe is a brand. Adventure Time's a brand. Endangered Species here is a brand. Slugterra is a brand. Kylie Jenner is a brand. Pepsi is a brand. There's some dream of brand convergence because these things, although they're a lot of the time just these kind of gross recuperative capitalist entities or whatever, um, they still take up space in our like heads, in our myth, in our legend. When we communicate with each other, sometimes we'll make reference to objects like Pepsi or The Simpsons or anything. Um, and so there's a lot of context in our lives where we just sort of use these things as signifiers. For Star Trek fans out there, right? Like we love that episode Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. um, and people really communicate that way. It's sort of like whatever. Homer at the bat, you know. Um, or like we communicate with memes, like Mo throwing Barney out of the bar, and then Barney comes up behind Mo. Um, so we are able to use these things on a lot of contexts, like when we're instant messaging each other or whatever, when we are posting kind of privately on the internet. But like you can't necessarily use those things when you're making some this like branded mobile game like this, because there's all of these problems with how everybody gets paid, and what the intellectual property situation might be. And so there becomes this dream of brand convergence where it's like, well, what if we could just keep using that iconography, but everywhere, right? Like what if I could use Homer Simpson related stuff? Um, what if Homer Simpson could appear in everything? Like, what if Homer could be in this game? What if I could have Homer as an avatar, and I take that avatar across all of the other contexts that I play? Because I just really like Homer Simpson. I don't know. It's like Ready Player One. You can do that, right? And characters do stuff like that in Ready Player One. That fiction, that narrative is a whole dream. All right, well, yeah. Here's another galaxy brain concept for you from B. Sprawlbug as we observe my playthrough of Endangered Species, Spinball Carnival, my friend. But another galaxy brain take from B. Sprawlbug. Galaxy brain take from B. Sprawlbug number 2. Let's go. When people see something like Nintendo suing a person into the fucking ground and ruining their life because they tried to make a fan game or something like that, um, they see cracks. They see cracks in the reality that they thought they had, right? Because normally we act in this world of like fun little signifiers, like we Mario's our friend, Mario's our guy, we love Mario, we make jokes about him, we make memes about him, we talk about him, you know, whatever. Zelda, these are icons to us. They're icons. They're supposed to be in some kind of public comment or something. Um, but when Nintendo sues a person into the fucking ground, we realize that they're not really in any kind of public comment, that they're actually the product of some companies like intellectual landlordism or something. And that kind of disturbs us, right? And it fuels this dream of brand convergence, of a time when somehow, like Willy Wonka or somebody, is able to pull all of these warring corporate states together into some kind of shining consensus where, like, nobody has to get suited to the ground anymore for trying to make a fucking Mario fan game, because that time is over, because everything is kind of converged. We have the ability to just play a game as wearing a Mario skin or something, and there's some way to get a fair amount of money into Nintendo's hands for it or something. Who knows, right? But we can make a fan game, and we can use our icons, because then we can have our public comment, right? We can treat a character like Mario as the kind of multi-generational, international, folk cultural sort of important piece of people's lives, important like piece of iconography for the public that he is at this point. We don't have to treat him as like some dude's intellectual property, or whatever. Like, honestly, Mario Maker should be free. We should all be able to make Mario at this point. It's been long enough. Um, this whole business of like repeatedly exploiting our, our game making traditions as if they were like pieces of intellectual property, like it's stupid. Ready Player One is a story that acknowledges that it's stupid. It sort of dreams of a world where, like, if you want to do Tron stuff, you can just do Tron stuff. If you want to do Mario stuff, you can just do Mario stuff. If you want to do Mario stuff with Tron stuff, you can just do it. So taking that back to this game, when I was working branded content back in those years, I was imagining a world where, well, why can't we take this endangered species stuff and let's do some The Who stuff? Like Pinball Wizard is fun. People would be a riot. People get it. Well, I don't know. My dad would get a kick out of that, and I would too. Some people would. Well, why can't we take like mix in some Metroid stuff. Like I wanted to have a cool scene in this game where you like um as a pinball you go into a statue's hand and the statue like gets up like in Metroid and it starts walking, but then it starts playing basketball with you or something and it like slam dunks you. But like why can't we have Samus show up and do a brief cameo because we're trying to do this homage to like her and to Metroid. Like why couldn't we have some big brand convergence where the icons that we're trying to work with, that we're trying to pay some kind of like respect to, or trying to make reference to, or whatever, the stuff we're actually doing. Like, why do we have to do these like 72 layers of indirection where like, well, it's not Metroid. It's a like robot carnival in the world of endangered species that's set inside a tree stump, but it's actually inside of a carnival, or that maybe it's a pinball table, you know, a million things to make it not infringing on some landlord's property, like a digital, virtual, intellectual landlord's property. Um, it's all a little bit silly and pointless. You know what I mean? Uh, there's some other world, um, and you'll see it sometimes. You'll see it in the world of like indie game publishing, where there are just in kind transactions. Like somebody decides that their friend is allowed to put a character from my game into to their game because whatever, we're just chill. Um, so Super Meat Boy has characters from a bunch of indie games in it, and I really don't think that was all about like people getting paid. Um, so like sometimes brand convergence can be created through acts of like goodwill and in-kind donation and stuff. The kind of community organizing model of doing anything, but certainly of making games. Um, I think that's like quite a lot favorable to, you know, the world of licensing and doing all of that stuff, which is always a little bit treacherous, a little bit crass. This is another one of our fluid chambers. Another kind of drink mixing thing. You can see me here trying to figure out how to launch myself into the bottom of it so that I can continue exploring this whole level. Um, there we go. Oh wait, no, this is me giving up. I wanted to get to the part where there's, if you go down the middle of it, I think you can unlock a costume. Um, but I guess I'll do that later because this is a 100% run. I did 100% it. I love the fish bones, like the garbage going through the other chute. I guess we spawn little chunks of garbage every time the player goes through there. It creates this like, you know, sense of like a slightly greasy like carnival operation. That was a little like physical comedy, sight gag. That's what you'd call it. Something from the world of animation that a lot of my colleagues come from. A sight gag that while you are traveling through the drink fluid, you also see, I don't know what it is, some kind of waste fluid. And there are suspicious things in it. It's just a basic unit of comedy, right? You were expecting just to be doing one thing, but you're also being shown something unexpected, and the unexpectedness is kind of worth a chuckle, you know. A comedy game like this, ideally, is creating a bunch of unexpected moments. So it's kind of like setting up expectations and then doing something unexpected, and then setting up expectations and then doing something unexpected, right? Something I think about now when I make games is the best moments for people, the ones they're going to remember the most often, are the ones where they have their expectations like subverted in some way that they find non-destructive, non-disruptive, but instead like just joyful. So like a little magic trick, a little joke. Um, Maybe, you know, you expect to have to move to the right, but you actually have to move to the left. Here I am getting into this extra area. Boom. And there is that little unlockable thing for me to struggle towards. Zag on them is a way to explain this sort of dynamic, right? It's kind of like if you can establish a pattern in a game, like zig and then zag and then zig and then zag and then zag, you know, of course they were expecting you to say zig, but instead you said zag. You zagged on them. Almost always that's worth a chuckle. You know what I mean? So there's all sorts of ways that you can accomplish that in any kind of creative project, but certainly in a project like this one. I think one of the ways we do that in this project is like you're not always expecting like the ancient temple thing to turn into like a disco party, but those are the kinds of sight gags that we try to include a lot of in this game. We include in this level there are like little robot mice between the walls. I feel like that's kind of like an example of doing this. It's like we set up this expectation that there are these robot characters working at the carnival, but you know, maybe you hadn't considered that like what if there are like mice that are eating the food at the carnival? Well, what if they're robot mice? It's like a little extra. You are familiar with the idea of the robot operators, but now you can be delighted by the kind of sudden and interesting aspect of like, oh well, there's also all sorts of other robot critters in this world. You know what I mean? That's worth a chuckle. That's delightful. In the end, you could really describe any act of game making as creating a, you know, a series of moments that are worth a chuckle, to sort of paraphrase, is it Sid Meier? At one point, we intended to allow you to ride around on the roller coasters in the background at this level. I think that ended up basically being cut for time. Um, but that would have been really sweet as well. And I remember playing a really cool prototype where you could sort of jump along the roller coaster in the carnival. It survives only in these like curvy splines in the background of this environment now, I want to say. You know, there were a lot of aspirations to do great things with a project like this, and not very many of them worked out. Too often, I would say we sort of resorted to these like boop the three things type progression mechanics. Um, in one sense, our goal was to produce a lot of interesting comedic vignettes, right? That every time you did one kind of enhanced the overall pinballness or like scoreness of the level. Um, but we didn't really have the time or resources, so we ended up doling out this like costume content in bits instead. And often it would be like boop the three things, get a costume. I think, you know, it none the whole thing succeeds as a kind of, I don't know, prototype, a prototype for something that could be pursued further. There are certainly lots of like spinball dish games that you can kind of find in the world today. But I would say that none of them really match exactly the feel of this thing that we did. Um, the best parts of this, we haven't necessarily had a game that really embraces those and runs with them. And it's an aspiration of mine, you know, whatever, at some point in my life. Return to this idea of being like a round object flying through a bunch of like smooth shoots and kind of like doing some exploring. You know what I mean? Having some adventures, talking to some characters, even though you're a pinball. Um, I like the idea that you're telling a story about how you became a pinball, you know. So at this point in the run, we're going to go and try to figure out what is the very last piece of content. And I think I know what the last piece of content is. I think it is the area where you get a multi-gull. There's like multiple gull-shaped pinballs that are kind of raining down. I think you have to destroy all of the bricks in order to unlock a final little piece. Um, and so that's what we're going to see me eventually discover and do here. But, you know, I think it's nice to be taking a little victory lap through the Aztec level, the ancient temple, the Temple of Thrones level. Um, the turning gears here are really nice. The pipes that parallax are really nice. I really like these wall textures. The kind of blue, the lighting, the green and different like hues of color wash lighting are really cool. I think Jesse and Pierre did a really good job with all of that stuff. At this point, this level is almost completely restored, right? Um, it's just like in a lot of ways, this game didn't succeed, right? But, you know, if I could go back to that time in that little office and sort of be there with those people again and be working on, something great, even if it didn't turn out to be great, right? We were there working on something great till it wasn't. Yeah, I would give anything to be back there in that room with those people again. You know what I mean? The game kind of sucks, but that's okay. Things that I would carry forward. Um, Take this control scheme and elaborate on it a little more. Make it so you can tap anywhere and do a fling. That's great. Um, the fling zone concept I think is actually really cool. Add some supplemental stuff like double jumping, or if you hit certain bumpers, or if you do some cool, maybe restore your ability to jump around so that you can kind of do a little bit more. A, you don't get annoyed as much, and B, you could do a few more cool things. The time dilation effect, where it's like as you fling, everything slows down. That's really cool. I think that still feels amazing, even 10 years later. Very cool effect. Would love to sort of do something like that again. The kind of round ball character with a paper doll costume element, that's super cool. If we could have had a stat system, or anything that allowed the kind of it to be like equipment, like in a Diablo game, instead of just a pure cosmetic, um, then the cuteness of the accessories, or like the look of them, all that stuff would have been a lot more salient, a lot more important. And that would have worked out great. Paper doll system, I think, pretty much a success. um, Things I would not carry forward. Well, we've sort of done a lot of talking about those. All of this like Metroid interconnected level stuff, just like, no. Make this simpler. This is a mobile game. You know what I mean? Um, it's fine if you want to do something on like console that uses this control scheme, but if we're doing something on a phone, definitely go room by room with a fixed camera, something like that, right? Something more like cut the rope. I don't know. Do free ranging sections more rarely. Do more things that are kind of clearly compartmentalized and bite sized. I think it would be cool to have an interconnected world. Like, a lot of mobile games, you're working on fixing a mansion or something, you're slowly restoring an environment. That aspect of our work here was really correct. The idea of gradually improving this place that you're in. Um, we just needed to keep running with that and make it, maybe bring the open worldness more into the meta and less here in the core of the game, right? So like as you unlock new things, maybe there's more little rooms out there you can explore, and every day, coins regenerate, and you can go and collect the coins. Here I am, I think, discovering that, yeah, I have to do the multi-goal thing. So we're getting close to the end now. 100%ing this game. At the time, we were trying to find ways of making this a mobile game, and I remember Pierre was talking about stuff like garbage accumulates, and you have to you go and clean it. Things recur on a daily basis that require you to go in and kind of do something. And that was like, yeah, that was a cool idea. I think we should do stuff like that. You can make a whole, because the movement feels good, and it still feels good 10 years later, sort of thing. I think it's still promising 10 years later, sort of thing. Um, it would be fine to, I think, design just a series of recurring collectathons, like a weekly event where you go through this level again and, I don't know, collect all of a particular kind of item. Animal Crossing is full of little things like that, right? You just have to create some content economies, maybe have some light multiplayer stuff. Here I am discovering that before this was pulled off the App Store, disabling in-app purchases, I did buy one of the four purchase clothing sets. This one, the Digital Duds pack. It was my favorite. It has, a lot of really cool stuff in it, in my opinion. Look at all this wild stuff, fighting with all the other stuff. We'll discover that in the bottom of this costume galaxy is a little trash can, And if you fly into the trash can, it'll remove all of your equipped items. So you could go and like create exactly the costume that you want to create. That's the sort of thing. Oh, makes me sad to see the failing in-app purchase prompt. This was the first in-app purchase system that I ever implemented in my career. Maybe the first one to go offline. Well, you gotta smile because it happened, you know? The character's tail, Merle, his tail, is also a curvy spline, I want to say. I don't know that it's just a trail renderer. Um, I think it might actually be a damn curvy spline. These cannons allow you to change which of the three characters you are. It would have been nice to have some mechanics, of course, around the different characters. And there we have it. A 100% run of the no longer available Endangered Species Spinball Carnival. One of the first games that I kind of brought from conception through completion. Certainly the first Unity game. And we learned so much about how to build Unity projects from making this game. I love this game. I'm really happy that I got to work on it. And if you made it this far in the video, I'm really happy that you've done this with me. I've had a lot of strong feelings seeing this project again. I'm happy I was able to kind of document portions of it before it became not really viable to do that. I guess what I should say about it is every day when I do game making in the present, I'm still looking for opportunities to bring a little bit of that spitball into it. You know, it's like an important part of, I don't know, my history as a game maker. And it's an important signifier of the stuff that I like to do and the way that I like to do it. There comes a time in your life as a game maker where you sort of have to permit the ideals that you accumulated during your like training or whatever to come into contact with, I don't know, commercial realities, for example, the reality of the world. And there's a lot of shit that you sort of internalize coming up as a game maker that makes that process difficult, right? The idea of, oh, just make a good game and you'll be fine is, you know, at some point you have to realize that like just making a good game is never enough. And this game for me was the moment when you know, I made a game that I liked. I thought it was sort of, you know, good. I think it's kind of cool. I like it. I'm happy with a lot that we did in it. I have a lot of criticisms of it, but like I like it. But I see why it, you know, it didn't really succeed, and it could never really have succeeded. There's a lot of like reasons why, but as a professional, you're obligated to sort of observe what works and doesn't, and you have to use the things that do work, and you have to stop using the things that don't work, right? Um, so part of like I think making the transition from, I don't know, a junior or an intermediate to more of a senior is like having this kind of contact with reality, right? You did something that you thought was like really, oh, I don't know, I'm an auteur or something. I'm gonna like make a bunch of choices and my creative spirit's gonna like do something. And then you see how that works out. Like how did it work out for the company, for the people around you, all of this other stuff. Um, and you sort of realize that you're really not here to impose your creative standards or whatever. You're really not here to impose yourself on anyone or anything. You're here to respond to needs and requirements that are around you. And like generally, I think the best way to measure yourself is in like the quality of your response. So like, does the project work becomes a more and more important question as you get more and more senior in your career. Not so much, does a project reflect what you think? Does a project reflect what you want? That becomes sort of less and less important.
does the project do what people need it to, right? A lot of projects that I've worked on since this one have done a much better job of meeting people's like needs and requirements, I would say. And that's a way that I've kind of grown as a professional. You know what I mean? I like this project as my sophomoric effort. I hit like Battle for Terra. The first thing I did professionally was a pretty big success as a little flash game, promotional game. But like millions and millions of people, I think, played it in the end. So I was happy with that. And then this game was supposed to be a kind of wild leap into, I don't know, another realm, another arena of competition. I was sort of hoping for it to, set the world on fire or something like that. I don't know. Of course, that didn't happen. So it's like the sophomore album, didn't work out the way I thought. After this, I guess I developed more of an interest in like playing the music that my other bandmates were playing, or playing the music that the audience wanted to hear. I'm an entertainer, right? This game was entertaining for me. My subsequent games, I think, were more entertaining for everyone else.